Thank you very much for the introduction and the music, and thank you for the invitation to be here, Olivier and Melissa. It's a pleasure to be sharing some of our research with you today. For those of you not familiar with CEB, we're essentially a best practice research and advisory company. And what we do is we align ourselves to functional leaders that sit within an organization, and we help those senior leaders address and overcome the functional priorities that they face. Now, I'm based here in Singapore, very much focused on supporting regional heads of sales on their selling challenges, essentially. So the big theme of today, of course, is around social selling. But what I'm going to focus on is probably the selling aspect of the social piece, even though, of course, it's relevant on both sides. Just to start things off, I'm going to share in the 20 minutes or so that we have today a brief overview of a journey that we as an organization have been on now for a number of years, really looking at some of the changes that are happening in the B2B selling environment, some of the new complexities that are coming on board. I think we can all agree that life is much more complex these days. We have greater competition that we're dealing with. We have more decision makers involved in purchase processes, as you saw. We're dealing with different in-kind talent requirements. It's no longer enough to hire and recruit individual superstars. We need people that are more network-oriented, both socially, both online, but even within the organization as well. Now, one of the big complexities that we've started to track over the last few years is also around how customers buy. So let me start things off with a very simple graphic, which you see here, a different kind of buying. Essentially what we did was we surveyed thousands of B2B customers around the world, across industries, across geographies, and we asked them, if you think about your purchase process, when you start first on the left-hand side, due diligence, you start doing that research, you start identifying your needs, to when you finally make a purchase on the far right of the screen, we ask them at what stage are you in before you proactively engage a supplier. So essentially, before you pick up the phone and call a supplier, before you respond to an email, before you take that meeting, how far along are you when it comes to that purchase decision? And what we found was that on average, 57% of the decision is complete. And that's quite scary in the B2B selling environment that we're operating in. This means that customers have essentially done all their homework already. They've prioritized their needs. They've probably shortlisted a few potential solutions that they're going to go after. It's very likely that they've also gone and kind of started to think about the price that they're willing to pay for the solutions that they have in mind. First of all, actually, let me share that the variance itself, it didn't range from 10 to 90%. In fact, it was 45 to 65%. So it's not a huge difference in variance either. So what happened? What changed in this environment? Why is life becoming that much more difficult for our sellers? And really the answer, or at least one of the answers I should say, is information or access to it. B2B customers these days have so much access to information, whether it's online or it's learning communities that they participate in, associations that they go and share knowledge on, the networks that they already have. Customers have access to so much more information these days than they ever had before in the past. And that creates a very difficult environment for us because our customers are so far along the decision that oftentimes at that 57% mark, the only conversation they want to have with your salesperson is about price. And of course, that's the last place we want our salesperson to at least start the conversation. It gets very difficult to start changing their minds and reframing conversations at that stage in the decision process. And so given this environment, what we did as an organization, we started to look at, well, in this world of the empowered customer, what can we do? What do customers really care about? So we started having surveys, having conversations with these thousands of customers around the world. And we asked things like, does the product matter? Does the service matter? Does the sales experience matter? And then we asked them, when it comes to those customers, are you loyal to them? Will you continue to purchase from them over time? Will you buy more from them over time? And will you advocate for their organization? And what we found after running the regression analyses we discovered that really interesting changes are happening in terms of what truly drives customer loyalty these days. I see lots of people taking pictures. I assume it's of the screen, not me. Let me shift over here. So what you see here are 4 bars across the top of the page. And let me walk you, the obvious answer is on the far right, but please avoid going to the right, start on the left. If we look at the first 2 bars that you see on the left-hand side, we have company and brand, and we have product and service delivery. Add those 2 together, you get 38%. So 38% is the impact on loyalty. That's scary. Most organizations, especially marketing organizations, we spend a lot of time and resources on marketing. So even when we got that data back, we were shocked. We started to think, all right, well, why is that? So again, we went back to our members, we went back to the customers, and we started to ask them, why isn't the brand, why isn't the product or service more important? And we were expecting the feedback from them to come back and tell us that, well, the product was terrible, the service took far too long, the brand just wasn't credible. But that's not at all what we heard back. In fact, it was the complete opposite. We heard, yeah, the product was great. The brand, incredibly credible. The service was fantastic. But the difference is, what they also said was, the competitor has a very good product as well. The service was fantastic. And they also have a credible brand. In essence, if you're choosing between GE and Siemens, both have very good brands, products, and services. And unfortunately, the only conversation they had to have there on then was either about price, because they're trying to push both sides, but also they had to look somewhere else to make that differentiation. Customers right now, they don't see the differentiation between your products and services to those of your competitors. As unique as we might think we are, in the eyes of the customer, it's very likely that we're not that unique. Third bar here is essentially about price, value to price ratio, and that's always going to be a very weak differentiator. I think we can all agree. Discounts, unless you're offering crazy discounts, it's always going to be a weak differentiator between you and the competitors. Really where the difference came in is on the far right of the page, which is around sales experience. And so what we found when it came to the sales experience, we had conversations with the members, and the feedback they gave us was that really the sales experience, the verbatim examples were that some sales reps would just show up in the office, they would show up and throw up a bunch of products and services. The other sales reps, what they would come in and they would actually teach me something new. They would educate me on something that I'm missing in my business, in my industry, in my market. They're providing value. I'm almost willing to pay for that 1-hour meeting that they were chasing me for the last 3 months. And really you see on the right-hand side of the page how it breaks down into some of the actual drivers when it came to sales experience. They offered a unique, valuable perspective on the market. They helped me navigate alternatives. They helped me avoid potential landmines, educate me on issues. And the supplier was easy to do business with as well. And so, given this environment, given that the sales experience is critical these days, of course, the first question that we then had was, well, what type of seller is going to go out and be able to deliver this type of experience? So again, we went to our data set. We, to date, have tested over 36,000 salespeople around the world, across industries, across geographies. And what we discovered was that every single salesperson out there falls into one of 5 behavioral profiles. So when we ran the regression analyses, when we pulled all that data together, what we found was that all of those attributes were naturally clustering into 5 different categories. We gave them the names that you see on top of each of the attribute lists. This is just a sampling, by the way. But the attributes are the real attributes. So let me walk you through the 5 and think about your sales team. In fact, think about yourself as well and how you engage with customers as I walk through these. If you start on the top left, we have the hard worker. The hard worker is the one that's usually first in the office, last to leave, very good in a process-driven or transactional type of environment. Self-motivated. Middle of the page, the challenger. These are the people that they love to debate. They push back. They push the customer. Internally, they probably push you in your internal meetings, but it's not to be obnoxious or pushy or aggressive. It's really because they want to drive value internally and externally. Top right of the page, you have the relationship builder. These are the people that they seem to know everybody. They have 1,000 business cards in their back pocket every day. They're at the golfing events or the cocktail receptions. Very generous with their time. If a customer or prospect says, hey, let's go grab a coffee, they're the first ones out the door having a coffee. Not always so effective at turning those relationships into business opportunities, unfortunately. Bottom left, you have the lone wolf. Every organization, every team, I'm sure there's a few of them in this room. In fact, they're probably not in this room, if I'm honest. The lone wolf, these are the people that they follow their own instincts. They're very difficult to manage, very independent. They're probably the ones that submit their expense reports 3 months too late. And in fact, if we're honest, they're probably out there selling things that your company doesn't even make. But you put up with them. And the reason you put up with them is because they're very good salespeople. Unfortunately, when business stops, they can be very disruptive as well. So they're a little tricky to manage. And then on the bottom right, we have what's called the problem solver. The problem solver, they're the ones that are very much focused on driving they're almost reactive in nature. They're more of an account management type of personality, calling customers saying, is there anything else I can do for you from last month or last quarter, rather than hunting for new opportunities. Now, there is a profile here, and it's probably obvious given the title of my presentation, but there's a profile that truly overwhelmingly succeeds over the rest, and there's one which just fails, if we're honest. But before I get into the results, let me just, maybe a show of hands. Which of these profiles do you think is the most prevalent in Asia? Hard worker? A few? Yeah? Challenger? Not many. Scary. Relationship builder? The most so far. Lone wolf? I saw one hand go up. He's probably the lone wolf in the room. Problem solvers? A few as well. All right, so it looks like relationship builder was the biggest show of hands. That was the assumption that we went in with as well, and we were wrong. The hard worker is the most prevalent in Asia. With about 43% of the sales force that we tested fell into the hard worker profile. When it comes to effectiveness, this is where things get even more interesting. So, slightly more complex graphic than the blue arrow, but if you look at the x-axis, you've got the different profiles, and you've got 2 shades of blue on top of each profile. So the light blue is the percentage of core performers or average performers within the organization, and the dark blue is the percentage of high performers that fall within that profile. So if I first orient you to the light blue bars, just pretend the blue ones aren't there, the dark blue ones, you can see that the challenger, 23% of average performers were challenger. Lone wolf, about 15%. Hard worker, 22%, and so on. What you'll notice is that there isn't much variance when it comes to the average performers. In other words, there's 5 different ways to be average within your organization. Where things get really interesting is when we focus on the dark blue bars. You can see far and above on the left of the page, the challenger, 39% of high performers were the challenger. They were exhibiting these types of behaviors. 25% were the lone wolf, so not bad, but remember, they're very difficult to manage. And what's shocking, or very surprising, relationship builder on the far right, only 7%. Now, we are in a social selling conference all about relationships, so let me stress, we are not saying that relationships are not important. It's much more around how you use those relationships. Relationships are critical for each of these profiles. And again, every seller has a dominant profile, and they have a secondary profile, and arguably elements of all 5, but everybody has a dominant profile in the way that they engage with customers. Relationships are critical for all of them, but the relationship builder, the way that they use those relationships is more social in nature, rather than using it as an opportunity to truly teach and add value and insight to the customers that they engage with. So let me just highlight quickly the 2 differences between challenger, or a few differences between challenger and relationship builder, the 2 extremes on that page. And I'll dive into the challenger one a little bit more detail in a few slides, but really what you see there is that they offer that unique perspective. They're really all about creating value. And in many ways, they're there to build tension, constructive tension. They want to create those discussion points and opportunities for conversation. Right-hand side, the relationship builder, they're much more about reducing tension. They like to get along, want to be friends with everybody, likable, generous with their time as well. Now, the other interesting piece as we continue where it gets even more interesting when we look at the complexity of the sale. We saw some of the earlier slides that were being shared around how the world is getting much more complex. More decision makers, longer sales cycles, forecasting has become a nightmare for any seller that's out there. The world is moving to more complex selling. But what you're looking at here is breaking out the performance by low complex sales or low complex deals on the left-hand side and high complexity sales on the right-hand side. And you can see the breakdown or the percentage of high performers that are effective in those areas. So again, if you focus on the left-hand side of the page to start, you can see, again, relatively even in terms of the percentages. So 20% were challengers, 25% lone wolves, 26% hard workers. Really what that's saying is that if you're in a low complex environment, any of those profiles can probably do quite well. Now, I would argue that in a low complex sale, you're going to drive a challenger crazy because they don't like the process and the operational nature of those deals. Hard workers are very good at those deals. What's interesting, if you look on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see when it comes to high complexity sales, that's where the challenger truly thrives. They truly succeed with 54%. Again, lone wolves, not bad, the guy at the back, but they're very difficult to manage. So let me just, I guess, summarize what the challengers really do differently and very well. And we've made it easy. We've used 3 T's. So they teach, they tailor, and they take control. When it comes to teaching, it's all about teaching for differentiation. What challengers do very well is that they're able to share that unique insight that customers are hungry for. Now, what you don't want the challenger to do is go teach for differentiation, share lots of knowledge and thought leadership and insights without it tying back to something that you can uniquely deliver as an organization. Because really at that point what you're doing is providing free consulting. You know, the customer is going to say, thank you very much, I love the insights, I love learning from you, I'm going to call your competitor now and get a 20% discount. What you want is you need that lesson, that teaching, that insight to lead back to something that only you can do as an organization, or at least that you outperform other organizations on. Tailor on the bottom left, tailor for resonance. Again, as Melissa pointed out, the average sale in Asia these days has more than 6 different decision makers involved in the process. We need sellers that are able to not only identify those 6 different people, but tailor the conversation built on that overarching insight to what the CIO cares about, what the CMO cares about, or the CFO cares about. And interestingly, when it comes to the 5.4 or the 6.3, identifying those people, yeah, it takes some time. But the real hard part is around getting those 6 people to actually talk to each other. Because these days, when we lose deals, oftentimes it's not to the competition, but it's because the customer can't make a decision. And then bottom right, take control. What challengers really do very well is they take control of the conversation. They don't mind talking about price. They don't mind some tension being on in the interaction. But again, it's not about being pushy or obnoxious. It's about respectfully standing your ground when the customer pushes back. Now, when I talk about teaching, when I talk about teaching for differentiation, we're not just talking about any type of teaching. There's really 4 key attributes that make up a good commercial insight. Top left, lead to your unique strengths. Now, if you don't have a unique strength as an organization, then you've got a lot more work to do, I think. You need to identify what is that unique thing that you can do as an organization. Because you need it to lead to that strength that you have. Top right, you need to challenge customer assumptions. You need to be okay and comfortable with disagreeing with customers. Because that's when they learn. Bottom left, you need to catalyze action. It has to drive action. Now, we're all humans, and humans hate change. But you, as sellers, you need to convince the customers that keeping things the same, the pain of keeping things the same, is far greater than the pain of change. And then bottom right, scale across customers. Again, there's no way that you can do this for individual customers across the region. You need to keep it at the segment level. You need to identify that insight that you want to teach and what it leads to within your organization, and then use that as the foundation to which you go out to market with as well. There's a way to deliver this teaching as well. What you see here is sometimes referred to as the choreography of a challenger pitch. Your sellers should be following something similar, or your pitch decks should even look something similar to this. If I just walk you through what the graphic is showing, on the y-axis, you see what's very technically called the level of customer excitement. Higher up, they're happy. Down, they're not so happy. And the middle, the dotted line, is neutral. That's where their emotions are neutral. So when your seller goes into that meeting, or when they start going through that pitch deck, you start with the warmer. That's when you're maybe sharing some high-level data. You're trying to build credibility. I understand you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer. I understand your business. So everyone's comfortable. You're ready to continue the conversation. Secondly, you do the reframe. The reframe is all about either sharing some insight of a challenge that the customer had no idea they should have been worried about, or a challenge that they're aware of, but they just didn't know the magnitude of that problem. So now the customer's learning. They're excited. It goes up the level of customer excitement. Immediately, as soon as you get them happy, of course, now we need to make them really depressed. So first we start with the rational drowning. We share the problem is actually a lot bigger than you think. Let me share some data with you. Let me share some insight with you around why you probably missed on something huge. So now they're starting to get a little worried. And then you bring them even lower down. They're ready to jump off the bridge. Emotional impact. You make it personal. You humanize the problem for that individual within their function. You make it really intense, that constructive tension that you create in that room. And just as they're at their most depressed in that pitch, you start to bring them back up. You start to share, there is a new way. There is an alternative. We've seen it happen before. Let me talk to you about that. And then finally, and only lastly, you land on your solution. The last thing they should talk about is their solution. You see too many pitch decks these days when a seller goes into a meeting and the first 5 pages are all about me, 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 and not about the customer. And that needs to change, because ultimately, the customer doesn't necessarily care about you as an organization. They care about solving their problem. But secondly, as unique, again, as we all think we are as organizations, in the eyes of the customer, we're probably not that unique. And so it's critical for us to prepare our sellers to exhibit those skills and behaviors that allow them to engage earlier on in that blue arrow, and in a different in kind way where they're truly trying to teach and add value in every single interaction that they have with customers. And so, with 2 minutes to spare, that brings me towards the end of my session. If you're interested in learning more about the Challenger work, I should have actually shared a few screenshots of books, because we have a couple of books as well. I forgot to add them in here, but The Challenger Sale is the name of the first book. And then part 2 now, if you are not familiar with it, is actually called The Challenger Customer, which looks at it from a customer's point of view. Interestingly, we found 5 different profiles of sellers, but there's also 7 different profiles of buyers within a customer organization. And some of them you actually need to avoid, and some of them can help you on that journey to get the deal across the line. So if you're interested in learning more about CEB or what it is we do, very likely we have relationships with your organizations already. But please do add me on LinkedIn or send me an email. Here on the bottom left, send me an email if you're interested in the slides or want to have a conversation around anything, and more than happy to continue it after the break. Thank you so much.